What is up, you guys? We are back for our third episode of the Radiantly Free podcast, and it is so snowy outside. We are expected to get more, but it has been quite interesting with all this snow. I'm really excited about this one because this is one that I have seen so many times in the young adult Christian atmospheres is the phrase or the questions of, I don't know my calling. I don't know my purpose. And I feel like we have all felt the pressure of not knowing what our calling is, or being like, okay, I'm 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and so forth, and I don't know where I'm going or where I'm supposed to, like what I'm supposed to do. And let me tell you, we've got some great things coming for this podcast. If you have ever found yourself asking that question, or maybe you're currently asking yourself that question. So I want to get into this too, this is something that hit me really hard a few months ago whenever I was working on this podcast episode, just kind of writing it out and stuff. Look at life as like a staircase, okay? We are all constantly, or hopefully, trying to get up to the very top. We have moments where we take breaks and there's like landings, you know? Like, have you ever seen those staircases that you go up one side, you have a little landing area, and then you go up another, kind of like that. And I was thinking about how in our lives, our purpose and our calling, I feel like changes over time. And for some of us, it's very crisp and clear, and from the very beginning, we knew exactly what we were supposed to do, and I am so happy for you. But for others, it's a lot harder because sometimes I don't think we're all called to just do one specific thing. I think it's like that staircase. We land on these different landing pads of, okay, this is where I'm at right now. This is my purpose and my calling for right here and right now. And so I feel like we just hyper-focus on our exact calling that we start missing the opportunities that present themselves in the present. I feel like one of the best things that you can start focusing on if you feel confused and you don't know where you're at and you don't know where you're going is to focus on who He has called you to be, not exactly what He has called you to do. A lot of times when we're stuck in this moment of waiting or trying to figure things out, we don't put enough emphasis on becoming who we need to be. And we're just like, okay, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? I'm just going to sit on my couch and not do anything. But that is not the most effective or efficient way to find out what you're called to do. I think your first thing that you need to do is sit down and realize that we are all called to a baseline purpose. It's kind of how I fit it in my brain of we are called to reach people and share the gospel and show Jesus to others and to love Him and chase after Him to the best of our abilities. Every single day we need to wake up and renew our minds and choose Christ. And so that is the number one thing that we can do if you are so confused with your calling, is realize that you are called to follow Jesus and fulfill the Great Commission. And that is number one, first and foremost. It doesn't necessarily have to be specifically answered, but we all have that baseline purpose as Christians to fulfill. But then also start realizing that God has called you to do certain things in your present that I feel like open the doors to other things. So, focus on what He asks you to do and who He says you are, and become more responsible of your own character and your own maturity, and push yourself to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be. Or maybe you do know your calling and you're not really walking in it yet, or maybe that's more of a calling for that's down the road. And say you work at McDonald's and you're like, okay, this isn't my calling, but put every ounce of your being into being where you're at, honoring your employer, honoring the fact that people rely on you, and do the best that you can to spread Jesus and show Jesus with what you have now. Because in the Bible it says that those who are faithful with a few things will become ruler over many. And so with the few things that you have right now, regardless of if you feel like you know what your calling is or maybe you're asking yourself, be faithful with the things that you do have first and foremost. My mom has said this countless times, but you can't complain about something that you're not willing to fix. So if you're constantly like, I don't know what my calling is, but you're sitting there doing nothing, or I feel like I don't have a purpose and I'm waiting on this, or I'm waiting on God to just make it happen for me. That is not how we run this show. We are going to step up and step into who God has called us to be so that we get to what He has called us to do. And as we progress in life and we stop complaining about it and we start taking action against it, which shout out to my Yam fam, that is what our Yam leader Devin was talking about, is how we just have to give a little bit more. So put a little bit more action into what you feel like God has called you to do or has called you to be. And you will realize that you're not complaining about it so much because you are taking those steps to accomplish becoming the person that you feel like you're supposed to be and working to get to the things that you feel like you're supposed to do. And that is why it is also important. Again, and I feel like I've talked about this every episode so far, but be around strong believers. That is so, so important, and I will probably stress this every episode that I feel like I have to give a list of how to accomplish things. Be around people who support you, who help protect you and lead you and guide you, but also strengthen you and push you to be who God has called you to be, who can speak life and who can challenge you, because someone doesn't have to tell you exactly what to do or tell you what not to do to challenge you. Sometimes it's just seeing how they are. Sometimes it's going and listening to a message that tells you to give a little more. And so that is just so important, is to be around other people and other believers who can kind of help get you into this community, because I feel like in community there's opportunity, and in opportunity there's accomplishment for God's kingdom. So for sure, be around people who are strong believers. This next one I have had to do several times is remove and limit distractions. So for me, recently it has been not just social media, but games on my phone. I have absolutely been crushing these games on my phone. Like, it is embarrassing how long I have been playing these games. And so I had to delete a lot of them off of my phone because I'm like, this is taking away time that I could be working on accomplishing more things for my podcast, or reading the Bible, or praying more, or spending more time with God, or with things that are important. That obviously give yourself some relaxing times and allow yourself some times that you can just debrief and relax and calm down. But also limit that, because you do not want to be missing out on so much time because you're doing something that, as my mom says, is a time waster. You don't want to be a time waster. You don't want to be someone who constantly sits there and is just eating away at your day doing nothing and accomplishing nothing. So make sure to limit those distractions, or to completely remove them. For me, like I've said before, I am kind of an all or nothing. Like, I have to get it away from me. Like, I had to completely delete it, or I'm just like, oh, I'll just like play for 5 minutes, and then 5 turns to 15 and 15 turns to 30, whatever, you get the gist. So, and maybe that's social media, maybe it's phone games, maybe it's you're watching too many movies or too much TV, or you're hanging around people that aren't really living the best lifestyle and it's taking you away from what matters the most. And so you kind of have to be the one that decides, okay, what is taking up all of my time? And is this fruitful time, or is this time wasting? So be sure to kind of look at your life as a whole and be like, okay, where do I spend the most time? What controls most of my life? And is this helping me find the opportunities and grow myself to walking in what God has called me to walk in? So that's definitely a big, big, big one. I also think a huge part of figuring out your calling is look at the desires that you've had, and maybe it's since you were a kid. And just because you weren't like, oh, I want to be a doctor when you were a kid, doesn't mean that you didn't have God-given desires, because sometimes it's you love helping people, or you love solving things, or you love to sing, or you love to do art, whatever it may be. Look at those things that you actually enjoy doing. And I think as you become like aware of, wow, I did have that desire and this could be something I would want to pursue, start trying things out that revolve around those desires. So maybe you like helping people and you're like, okay, I'm going to see what it is like to be around healthcare. I'm going to see what it's like to work in a church or whatever it may be that kind of fits that desire. Or maybe you love teaching, so maybe you try being around settings where you would be a teacher, or working and serving in your youth ministry or your kids' church. Whatever it is, like, really try to pinpoint those desires and then find the things that kind of fit what you naturally like to do. Because I feel like so many people just try to pick what society would think is cool or that other people might appreciate or find intriguing, rather than like, hey, what is it that I truly desire? Because I also feel like that creates longevity, and that just kind of helps you find so much enjoyment in your life to be like, wow, God gave me this desire, and I can see the fruit of following in that desire all throughout my life. So definitely find those desires and try those things out, because you will find your place of peace. At some point, you will rise up into the area you're supposed to be in, and you will realize, wow, I am at peace with where I'm at. I do feel like this is where I'm called to be. I actually heard this quote probably a year ago, and this is whenever I had moved back home from Texas, and I was really struggling because I was just like, I am back living with my family, and it's like, this is just so different, and I didn't really want to be here. And so I was really keeping myself very cut off from everybody. And I heard this quote. We went to a Thomas Wright concert, and he was actually the one who said it, but he said, be where your boots are. And that was so impactful to just how I viewed my current life situation of right now, this is where I am. And I can either waste my time, or I can be present where I'm at. I can connect where I'm at and realize that these are the cards that I'm playing with, and I can make the most out of it rather than being miserable and feeling like, oh, I just want to go somewhere else. I just don't want to be back home. Little by little, it wasn't like an immediate response, and even still, I'm connecting myself more and trying to be more present with where I'm at. But little by little, I started to realize that everything was sort of coming together, because this is where I was and this is where I was planted. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take this for all it has, and I'm going to get connected. I'm going to give it a shot, because this is where my boots currently are. And you just have to trust that process of, sometimes you do have to take that leap of faith to do something that is so completely out of where you currently are. But sometimes you have to be like, okay, this is where I'm at, and I'm going to just take it day by day, and I'm going to take it step by step. And eventually you start to see that life weaves itself in a beautiful way, and it comes to be this beautiful picture, but you have to take those steps and allow it to kind of develop itself. So I definitely feel like that is just so important, to be where your boots are, be where you currently are, and realize that this is what's going on, and I'm going to make the most out of it until new opportunities arise, and I'm going to honor the position that I'm in and trust the process as I walk through it. And I also think that kind of leads right into like not selling yourself short of, just because you may be back in your small town does not mean that you can't make an impact or that you can't achieve big things. And it also doesn't mean that you're stuck there forever. So don't sell yourself short thinking that you're not good enough, or that you're not going to accomplish it, or because of these factors you won't be able to do what God wants you to. Because I promise, as time goes on, you'll start to realize that you are equipping yourself and becoming more qualified to do the things in the next step. And with every step, you have to qualify yourself more. You have to learn more and grow more and just walk through life growing. So don't take this opportunity that you have right now for granted to grow yourself, and don't think that just because it's not exactly how you thought it was going to look like, that it's any less important to focus where you're at. I think we've all probably heard Jeremiah 29:11. It says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." So if that's the case, and we believe that God means what he says and that he says it for a reason, then we can walk in a knowing and a trust that God has ordered every step before us, and we have to be faithful to walk in those steps and grow closer to him, because the closer we are to him, the more we hear his voice, and the more that we hear his voice, the more that we are able to walk in those purposes that he's called us to. Because without him actively in our lives, having this relationship with him, how are we supposed to know what he wants from us? And so because of that, we have to take responsibility of putting in effort and walking out what God has called us to do. Because it is our responsibility to pick up our Bibles and read it, because he's not going to do it for us. It is our responsibility to talk to him and get to know him as a father and someone who truly loves us and cares about us and wants what's best for us. And just because he wants what's best for us does not mean that we are not going to go through things that are hard. I think as I've grown up, especially in the church, I've realized that just because God has called us to something does not mean that life is easy. And in fact, it seems like the people that were called to things actually had life really hard. And it's a lot more challenging whenever you're like, okay, I'm going to walk in this calling. I think we have this idea that everything is just going to be perfectly fine. And because God has called us to it, that nothing bad is ever going to happen and it's just going to be peachy. That is not the reality of it. It is hard. It is life. It is a fallen world that we live in. But God knows what he has planned for us to give us a hope and a future. And so that is just so important to realize, that we so often hyperfixate on the future to the point that we miss opportunities in the present. And I think that's my number one piece of advice in the here and now of how to figure out your calling, is to stop trying to figure it out and just live currently where you're at and kind of let it figure itself out. Because it is so fascinating to me in this current time of my life, because my grandparents have run this recycling company, and the way that it looks now is a lot different than it used to. And my grandpa knew he was called to open this company and run this company. Has now come into a time where it's like, okay, God, what's next? He's 70 years old. And I have realized that it's not like you are only called to do one thing all the time. And I feel like some people are. Some people are more like, okay, yeah, this is like the big overall, big umbrella covering of what God has called me to do, and that's wonderful. But a lot of people, it is this sometimes year by year change that happens because we are climbing up that staircase. View that staircase as the present. Like, okay, this is where I'm at, and I'm just going to keep taking up these steps till I get to my next landing. And if this is where I'm at right now, but I still want to keep going up, I'm just going to keep focusing day by day, second by second, of like, okay, what decisions can I make that better me, that push me forward, that progress who I am, and make me better equipped to accomplish what God has called me to accomplish. And if you are ever in doubt of, okay, but I don't necessarily know what I'm supposed to do, remember that we do have that baseline purpose of, just because you don't feel like you're called to speak in another country does not mean that you don't have a calling on your life, because we have all been called to reach other people and to become more like Jesus and be the salt of the earth. So even if that means that you're working a job that you don't really necessarily like, but it's what pays the bills and it's where you're at right now, does not mean that you are without a calling or without a purpose. So stop trying to hyperfixate on trying to figure out what God has called you to do, and start focusing on what God has called you to be, and focus with right now, in the present, what steps can I take? And also realize that you are unique and you have your own story. And I kind of touched on some of this in my last episode about comparison, but your life is not going to look like anyone else's, and that's okay. And don't feel like your impact and your importance relies on someone else's story. Don't feel like just because it doesn't look the same, it's not as important, or just because it doesn't look the same, it's not as impactful. And I think you start to realize that your journey into becoming who God has called you to be is so beautiful and intricate and unique to you, and you find so much more happiness and fulfillment to know that God knew you before you were even born. He formed you, and he made you fearfully and wonderfully, and he was like, okay, I'm creating this person with purpose to fulfill certain things and to have a certain impact on the area that you're in. And he wants you to rely on him and trust him that his plan is so good. So I encourage you today to stop putting so much pressure on yourself to figure it all out, and just take it day by day. You don't have to figure out your calling, but we do have to constantly make ourselves better and strive to be more like Jesus and to grow closer to him so we can hear his voice, so that we know whenever he says go, that we go, or whenever he says don't, we don't. And so that is so big for people who are struggling with not knowing what they're supposed to do or feeling like they don't have a purpose, is realize that you do have a purpose, even though it might not be specific yet or it might not be super clear yet. There are things that you can do in the present time to fulfill who God has called you to be and what He has called all of us to do, and allow each day to unravel until you finally get to this point where you look back and like, wow, God, I see your hand in my life. And you start to realize that your calling and who you were created to be sort of happens over a course of time. Because if I look at myself 10 years ago, I probably would not have even thought that I would be sitting here right now. But now I can look back and be like, wow, but I can see how God had His hand on my life even 10 years ago, of how this has all been weaved intricately and on purpose. So that is my encouragement to you today, is just to allow yourself the freedom to walk away from the pressure that you have to know your calling and focus on every day and every step. Thank you so much for joining me for our 3rd episode. This has just been so fun, and I'm really glad that you're here. Definitely run on over to Instagram, where you can follow us under Radiantly Free, and we will post updates there and anything new and upcoming. So thank you so much for joining, and I hope you all have a great day.